Oranos, Oranon, Oranos meaning the sky or the heavens. But remember, when the Greeks looked at the sky, they saw gods. Metanoite, metaneo meaning to accompany, let's see, to know by intellect, the exercise of mind. This is where we translate to repent, to think differently. Metaneo means to think differently. And then our extraneous word, diabolos, dia. Remember we have parabolo, touching one axis, hyperbolo, touching no axes. So we have a telos with one, or a logos with a singular telos, a logos with an infinite telos, and a logos with no telos, which is diablos, which is translated devil. Isn't this wonderful how these words fit together?
It's basically describe the devil as somebody that has no point in their life.
Yeah, just like the point. Remember the point? Me and my arrow. Yes, if you remember the point, you remember what I'm talking about. I do. But the point, they had no point. So, yeah, and right, exactly right. The devil in a Greek thought has no point. In other words, he makes arguments with no purpose or no point behind them.
Two-minded.
And, these are the people you really hate to debate.
Yeah.
Because they have no point to debate. You remember? What do we call that?
Politicians?
Well, yeah.
There you go.
Just kidding.
But you're going to be a devil's advocate, right?
Yeah, you're going to take any side.
That is a very Greek saying, to be a devil's advocate, because it is literally what that means. You are arguing with no point in mind. So if you keep this in your mind straight with this Greek thought, everything should become kind of clear, very clear in what we look at. So let's see. We got John the Baptist, and we already made the point that he could not be unclean because, remember, we talked about the baptism thing. So he's observing. The baptism in those days was you're standing there, you're observing. In Christian parlance, the Christian person is what? Saying, I baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And the person puts themselves under the water. And when we talked about the didache and how this was, how things had changed in the world. Man, that's the thing. I don't want to give you too much to fight, other Christian groups. But, if someone gives you a hard time about, well, okay, you sprinkle or you dip or whatever, you say, well, how much water does it take? Right? See, in grace, that's what the didache says. Well, how much? Single drop's enough, right? Mm-hmm. That's all you need. Because the Jewish view is it has to be complete immersion. If you're not completely immersed, you're not completely pure.
You missed the spot.
Yeah, you missed the spot. Uh-oh. Now, here's the big question. And it was asked before. I hope you thought about it. Why did Jesus have to come to John for baptism?
Someone had to observe, witness.
Do you notice the difference here in our thinking? If we think that Jesus is coming to the baptizer for the baptizer to do something to him, you see, that's our normal view, right? Our normal view is Jesus is coming to the baptizer for him to do something to him.
That raises a conflict because John's not worthy.
Bingo. Who is worthy to baptize the Christ?
John says he is not. He says he's a witness.
But yet, in the worldview of the time, what did Christ literally do?
Baptized himself.
He baptized himself. The baptizer's observing the baptism. He's not doing the baptism. Do you see this?
So what was John's argument then?
Well, John's argument, he says, he tried to deter him, saying, I need to be baptized by you. In other words, I need to be observed by you. But in reality, John's reality right?
Yes.
No, not really. Because who does the baptizing? Who does the purification? God. The symbol, okay, it's just like in our world. I love what the pastor was talking about today. Is the wine the blood of Christ, or is it just wine?
Yes.
It's both. I thought the answer was always Jesus, but I'm going to have to admit yes. The answer is always yes.
That's Pastor Meyer. This is
That's
Pastor
Meyer,
Stowe.
Pastor Stowe. But you see, this is very important because we always assume that the words or the ideas that come from the speakers in the Testaments are absolutely correct, right? Well, what do we know about the baptizer's words? Who repudiated the baptizer? Jesus did. Right? Because the baptizer says, John tried to deter him, saying, I need to be baptized by you. But you come to me. And Jesus replied, let it be so now. It is proper for us to do this to fulfill. And literally, this is the word, is plero. I need to give you this word of the day. Plero means to fill up completely. To plero, to fill up completely all diakosune, all righteousness. Now, the word righteousness, this needs to be a word of the day also. Diakosune means balance. So, we think righteousness is what? I don't know what we think righteousness is. Righteousness is being like God, right? Well, according to the Greeks, righteousness is balance. Not necessarily purity or goodness or whatever. It's balance in things. But the Greeks believe that. Matter of fact, we get a philosophy from that. What's the philosophy? What's that? No. There's a philosophy in Greek thought.
Everything's in moderation.
Everything in moderation. And we talk about it all the time. That's Greek thought, guys. That's diakosune. Diakosune is this idea of all things in moderation. In everything. And the Greek worldview thought, this is perfection in their view, in the view of the Greeks. So, John consented to baptize, to observe the baptism of Christ. And let's ask this very important question. Why did Jesus need to be baptized by John? Why did he need to go to the Jordan? Where did you usually do purification? Temple. Before you did what?
Sacrifice.
Before you ate of the sacrifice. Why did he go to John?
Fulfill the prophecy. Bathe before sacrifice.
Well, John was outside, so is he like doing people that normally wouldn't go to the temple?
All right. This is why history is so important. You're right on, but this is why history is so important. Okay. What happened with Simon Maccabeus? Simon Maccabeus was declared to be what? High priest and king, and yet he was not of the lineage of Aaron. And what did that cause? Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Zealots. That's where we got them from. The Pharisees and Sadducees just stuck around and said, we're living with it. The Pharisees said, we're living with it. Who said we're not living with it? The Essenes. Zealots are Pharisees that are just rebels. But the Essenes said we're not living with it. What is Jesus Christ telling you by going for purification in the Jordan River by the hand of John the Baptizer?
He's in a scene.
He's in a scene. And what else is he telling you? He's telling you two things. Very important. But they're both the same. He's telling you he's an Essene. He's telling you he rejects who?
The synagogue. Or the Pharisees.
Unqualified
Everybody.
The unqualified priests.
priest. Yeah.
He's telling you that the temple purification is what?
Bogus.
Bogus. It won't work. That's what he's saying. Because he's going out to the wilderness to John. And also this gives us clarity. Who is John? John is a Essene. It also tells us something else that we didn't know. The Essenes were probably in active warfare at the time, and we know that they died eventually. You know, our idea of you remember the Essenes? They committed suicide at Masala? No. At Masala? Where is it? Anyway, they committed suicide, remember, altogether. And we've gotten a view of them as pacifists, but in this period, it's obviously not quite that way. Yeah.
So if we, I thought, had earlier determined that John was a zealot because Andrew was a zealot, so does that mean
No.
now we're determining that he's an Essene, or?
Simon was a zealot, but Andrew, we're not sure. The thing is that one name is not mentioned in the New Testament. That name is Essene. Josephus mentions Essenes. Everybody in that period mentions Essenes. Why is it obvious that the New Testament documents don't mention Essenes? Because they're common in the New Testament. So it's most likely, you know, when we go back and historically look at it, we know that it says Simon was a zealot. The second Simon was a zealot. This is easy, right? So what does that imply about the other disciples? They were probably Essenes. You know, because none of them are identified as Pharisees, although they were probably Pharisaically trained, and none are identified as Sadducees. See? But they went to the temple, right? But the Essenes rejected the temple. That's the big deal.
So
See?
how could you be an Essene and still go to the temple? They used the temple for education, but did not.
No, they did not use the temple for education. They used what for education?
Synagogue.
Synagogue for education. The temple is not a place of education at all. The temple is a place of
Sacrifice.
sacrifice, not even worship. You know, our assumption of worship, what's the assumption of worship in the Hebrew mindset? Sacrifice. Our assumption of worship comes from the synagogue. That's what we do. We do synagogue-style worship. We do not do sacrificial worship, per se. We've incorporated John Chrysostom, which is sacrificial, Mass, in our minds. You know, but that's a whole other story, historical story. But yeah, it's really important to note that, by the way, where would Jesus not be expected to be found if Jesus the Christ were following the pure Essene ideas? Where would you never find him?
In the temple.
In the temple. But yet, where do you find him?
In the temple.
Do you see the importance of this? Because the author of Matthew, we're going to get to that point. But the author of Matthew is telling you something very important about this guy. We could guess it now, but let's see what he says. As soon as Jesus was baptized in 16, he went up out of the water, and at that moment heaven, Uranus, was open, and he saw the pneuma of God, the Theos, descending like a dove. And by the way, it's not a dove, it's a pigeon. It's a paristera, it's a pigeon. And lighting, erachromai, coming on him. So basically came on him. We're not sure if that's an actual animal or if it was in the appearance of. Remember, in the Pentecost, it appeared like flames of fire, tongues of fire, but not necessarily tongues of fire. So it's an interesting Greek construction. But in any case, in 17, in a voice of heaven, legoed. A voice of heaven, legoed. This is my son, whom I agapeos. Agapeos. Love of the gods. Okay? This is really important, because what would a god say? I agapeo you. See, because gods could do that. So even in the Greek, I mean, we get, this is my son whom I love, but in the Greek it says, this is my son, huios, whom I have the love of the gods for. And only a god can say this. With him, I am well, oikodeo. Oikodeo, I am pleased. Oikodeo means I think well of him for that. Okay. This is really important. Therefore, what is the nature of this God?
It's God.
So, well, what is the thing that they have never told us yet, really?
The Son of God.
The Son of God. Son of Theos, God.